Hello and welcome back to the YouTube channel of Bethel Evangelical Free Church Hanley. I'm Pastor Gervais Charmley, and this is another Derbyshire church. This is another Victorian Gothic example. Once again, it's imitating the style of the 14th century because, as I said in the previous video, the Victorian Gothic architects tended to think in terms of 14th century being the flowering of medieval pointed architecture, often referred to as Gothic. Of course, it has nothing to do with the Goths. It's just an insult, really, that's hurled at it in the Renaissance by people who didn't actually understand why these forms work the way they do. You will notice that this church is very vertical, and these 14th century churches tend to be very vertical. Particularly, and of course this is an imitation one, and so it's even more vertical. It's not a big church, it's set beside a main road, so when we go outside there'll be a little bit of traffic noise. Well, there may be more than a little bit of traffic noise, but it is a church by a main road built about a bit over 160 years ago to serve a growing parish here, part of the great parish of Kirk Ireton. And Kirk Ireton, the medieval church that's set up on a hill in the little town there. And the outlying villages would have been served by chapels of ease. This would have been served by one, and the Victorians built this grand church. It's not enormous, it looks bigger than it is. It's your very common north aisle. There's a tower with a spire, although it's not at the west end, partly because of the site, and partly because one of the things the Victorians thought about with a building like this was, well, what if we can't afford to finish it? And the tower and spire are expensive. The spire needs a lot of maintenance today. Towers and spires are expensive, so if we don't have enough money for the tower and spire, we want to have it somewhere where we can perhaps add it on later without it looking too obvious. Now, they did finish it here, but it's a very typical Victorian setup, and we'll see it as we go around. As I say, it's a Victorian building. It's got some interesting modern alterations that take it to make it more useful in the modern age. So, without further ado, let's have a look around and see what there is to see. So, as usual, we begin at the west end, that is at the back of the church. And you can see from here a couple of notable features. The pulpit is of what's known as the swallow's nest variety. That means that the minister, instead of climbing up steps in the sanctuary to get into the pulpit is accessed from the vestry. So when the minister is to preach the sermon, he has to go around into the vestry and then come up in the pulpit. And at the end of the sermon, he has to go back through the vestry to get to the reading desk. We're at the west end here, and of course that means that there is a font. It's Victorian, it's a bit battered, I'm not quite sure why, but obviously it's had issues. Maybe it's just its soft stone. Nice font cover. Again, all of a period. Those candles are basically fake. They're the sort that have a little LED light in them, which makes it safe, of course, to have them inside that wooden construction. Recently, the pews at the back here have been taken out, and we've got a couple of tables so they can have tea, coffee, light refreshments at the back. So that's the west end. There's also a little kitchenette here, serving station, etc. And the north aisle has been completely cleared of pews and is now a flexible space that can be used, again, for tea, coffee, light refreshments, events, that sort of thing. It's all the kind of thing that happens with these village churches. Congregations are not as high as they were, partly because of depopulation and partly because fewer people going to church than would have been when it was built. But therefore, the church has to adapt. You'll notice the hymn board, that's hymns old and new, but never mind. There is the aisle, now called the alternate room, and so we'll move into the aisle. There's a couple of stained glass windows in here. Now this is a very typical one. They all seem to be sort of pattern stained glass windows. They've been bought from a pattern book. They're not special commissions in that sense. They're not new designs. Now, yes, of course they are special commissions in that somebody has paid for them, But they haven't had the money to say, oh, what we're going to do is we are going to get someone to do a brand new design for us. Instead, you have, well, this is bought off a pattern book. And so we have, he is not here, he is risen, the resurrection. We have here the ascension. These are the sort of thing that stained glass manufacturers would have their catalogues. And they say, well, we can do this in various sizes. And here we have the Annunciation. And again, we can do it in various sizes. That door there leads to the base of the tower, which is now also the toilet, which is quite useful, very useful in fact. There is the pulpit. At one point it had a candelabra, but that has been removed and you've now got an electric light. The crucifix behind it is a sign of a somewhat high church tendency, at least in the past. Eagle lectern, you'll notice the eagle lectern here is of wood, not of bronze. You can get it in all kinds of sizes and all kinds of shapes. Again, a lot of the furnishings here are pattern book. You can see there the royal arms. Now the size and shape suggests to me that it comes from an earlier chapel on the site. Or if not on the site, on a different site in the village, but this seems to be the most likely site it would have been. We have 14th century style glass there. You've got your presentation of Christ in the temple and then the baptism of Christ. You've got there St. James in the window by the door. And as we move carefully around so as not to jar the camera too much, we have here Christ the Good Shepherd, Christ receiving little children, and Christ the light of the world. The lantern he's holding there looks rather suspiciously like a railwayman's lantern, but at least it's not an imitation of the famous Holman Hunt painting. We have there the War Memorial for the Second World War. Good number, Michael George Furneaux, Thomas Wagstaff Fletcher, Edmund Greasley, William Hudson, Geoffrey H.B. Salter, John Robert Warren, Nigel Ronald Wheatcroft, and the inscription "May they rest in peace" is, again, has a high church tendency. We have below this rather odd three kings, and then you've got the Advent wreath, which, again, this is fairly high. Sanctuary lamp that obviously doesn't work anymore. Stained glass window behind. Stone reredos with nothing in the panels. And there's the organ. This is another one where you've got the pipes that are elevated above the organist. And the organist is down there. And so we've got a pedal board. It looks like it's a two-manual pedal board. Can't see a maker's name. And no, there we are. Bevington and Sons, Soho, London. So this is an organ that's built in London and obviously brought here by the railways. Looking all the way to the west there, and again you see the stained glass window at the back. And it's one of the advantages of having a setup like this, where there isn't a west tower, is you can have a window at the west end. And it's like that because of the site. We'll see as when we go outside. It's quite a constrained site. You've got roads to the east and the west. Again, one of these 14th century style windows with the nativity at the bottom, crucifixion, and then you've got the three kings. Well, the three kings, because it's Magi in the Bible, but three kings in the legends. And then you've got the shepherds on the other side, and Christ, his disciples. And you've got the kneeling centurion at the top. Of course, he's wearing medieval style armour because we are being anachronistic deliberately. Here we have St. George, St. Andrew, St. Patrick and St. David. So these are the patron saints of the British Isles. Quite a nice altar frontal embroidered. And then just these curtains either side. Decent chairs. So it's just a straightforward, really Victorian Gothic building here. It's a building that reflects what the people thought. There's a nice big Bible there, authorised version. It will be a 19th century Bible, and the pulpit beyond. And of course, the pulpit is access. There's the vestry door, and that's where the minister will go in. That would go in the vestry, and then he'd pop up there in the pulpit. So that is the inside of St James, Idridgehay. Let's have a look around the outside. And so here we are outside at Idridgehay. You can see immediately the simplicity of the building. You've got this nave here, chancel, and you can just see the tower beyond, and of course the aisle beyond that. Wooden porch, the graveyard. Well, the whole site is basically triangular because two roads meet just ahead of us. I'll actually swing the camera around to show that in a minute or so. And so we'll have a look around the outside. It's probably one of those buildings that's easiest to see when it's winter, when there's no leaves on the trees, just because this tree otherwise obscures everything. So let's have a look around. So Idridgehay, triangular churchyard, more or less. And I'll just swing the camera around. You can see here's the gate, and there is the main road. And there's also, you can just see the windscreen of my car. That's where the lane goes up by the church. So it's quite a constrained site. You see here, this wall represents, that's where the main road is, and then that wall there is the other road. And so the church is between the two. You can see why they couldn't put a west tower on, even had they really wanted to. Old churchyard. I've got graves in the 1870s. See what some of these slate ones are, because these slate graves are often the oldest, and if they're older than the 1870s or even 1860s, then that leads to the conclusion that indeed this was an older site where they built the church on it. So 1860 there, 1857. Yes, by the time you get 1850s, that suggests to me that this is a building that is on the site of an existing chapel, which makes sense, because otherwise why build in such a constricted site between the two roads? But if this is the site, and there is no other option, so here we are going round the east end. Obviously can't go out very far because of where the road is. That's would be the priest's door. I'm not quite sure he'd want to use it very much, but and this is the tower now. And this is the rest of the graveyard. This is the newer part, obviously, on the north side, because as usual the old part is on the south side. Tower again, and we'll have to pull out a bit just to get a good view of it, so move out onto the graveyard. That's me going down a rather large step. You can just see over there, that's the old schoolhouse. It's now a private house. Church and school are very often put together. The church had a lot to do with education, and in spite of what atheists and whatnot would like to say in terms of their propaganda, it wasn't propaganda. It was giving people an education, a real proper start in life. So here we are, right out on the north side. You can see how incredibly short the church feels here, because you've got that tower, and it all looks a little bit misleading, of course, because the aisle has a separate pitched roof. So you go, well, that's a tower, so is this the west end with a tower, and they've got a little chancel? Well, no, actually, that's the tower is at the east of the aisle. So there we are, that's St James, Idridgehay, just a little wayside Victorian Gothic building. Little church. The spire is a bit of a local landmark, as you can imagine. So there we are. We'll say a few words and then end the video. And so there you have it, St James, Idridgehay, this tiny little, well, it's not tiny little, but this small village church here in the Derbyshire Dales. Well, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoy the video. I enjoy coming out, even when it's a bit chilly like it is today. and looking at these buildings, exploring them. So again, thank you for watching, and may God bless you and keep you.